Um, so I'll follow for this evening the same format that you're most likely familiar with. We'll start with a meditation, we'll have a short break, then there'll be a talk or Dharma reflections, and then hopefully there'll be time for some exchange, whether it's comments, questions, something like that. And then I think it's announcements before we close, right? Yeah, okay. Um, for the meditation, I want to just kind of give a little bit of an intro to it, not because you'll be doing anything new, most likely, but it's coming from or stemming from my own reflection these days where, I'm sure you hear of teachings as, okay, these are the heart practices. And then the other practices may not get labeled, but they're not heart, basically. However, I really feel like we sometimes will then classify them as like wisdom teachings and heart teachings as if they're different. And then sometimes with that classification, there could be this subtle one is better than the other. And really, I like to think that all the teachings are heart teachings or practices, and all of the teachings are also wisdom practices. Ultimately, we're trying to cultivate samadhi, and that is usually translated as concentration. It could also mean gathering, unifying, centering the heart and mind. But one thing to note, or I think that is helpful, at least it was really helpful for me, is that the mind, given the correct conditions, will naturally settle. And so as a result, we don't need to force it. The other thing that I found comforting with that is that no one is born with a mind that cannot settle. That there may be all kinds of minds, especially, neurodivergent, neurotypical. There could be all kinds of minds, and they all settle when they're given the correct conditions. And so in a way, we can think of our practice as we're experimenting with what may be the conditions for our mind and body to settle. And then, of course, one way that we do that is by choosing an anchor, resting our awareness on that anchor, etc. But then also, of course, the mind will wander. So all of this so far may not be new to you. And so, of course, the mind will wander. And then how can we, and this is where I find the metta part of the practice can start getting infused. How can we, instead of maybe judging the mind for wandering, how can we maybe celebrate awareness returning? And recognizing the beauty that when the mind wanders, maybe it's just because the mind needed a little bit of rest. And that's okay. And then when awareness returns, to celebrate or see the beauty in that too. And then lately, to give a little bit more of that metta touch in my practice, when I notice that the mind has returned or the awareness has returned, I'll add something like, I love you, keep going, or, and this too, my love, or, and this too, as a way to honor or to tell myself that there is beauty in the mind going out, there's beauty in the mind returning. And both can be beautiful, basically, to not make any one of those the enemy. And maybe the last thing I'll say before guiding a practice is that these heart practices, they're also used often to cultivate samadhi or concentration. So again, just no real difference between the two, wisdom and heart practices. But that it's important to cultivate samadhi because a gathered mind is a powerful mind. And we need to build power at this time. That this is a time in our collective experience where those of us who are awake or are awakening need to build power. And it's this kind of power that can affect change. And that's why I love these teachings, because I feel like we have all the tools for collective change, the kind of power that can see clearly. And so that's why we do it, basically. It can be simple, it can be boring, but it could also be rich and vivid, surprising and inspiring. So with that, if you haven't yet already settled into a practice posture, please do. We'll practice for about a little less than 30 minutes because of that little introduction I gave. So it might be like 25 minutes. So knowing that, choosing a posture that'll be nourishing or as nourishing as possible for 25 minutes. And then if you haven't already jumped into, say, following an anchor, hold off for a moment, but eyes can be closed if that's comfortable for you. But tune into what your body, heart, and mind might be itching for to help it settle or relax. It might be taking a few deep breaths, might be adjusting your posture, might be something else. Whatever your body, mind, and heart is asking for that settling, give it to it. And eventually, whether now or in a few more moments, come to some stillness. May not be completely still, and that's okay, but relative stillness. Invite the body to relax. And when you relax your body, notice how that impacts your internal landscape, the mind, the heart, your effort. Notice how much settling is available to you. Depending on your day or other conditions, there might be a lot of settling or a little settling only. And one might be more pleasant than the other, but it's not better than the other. Then you might do an inventory of some of the meditation techniques you know. Perhaps it's following the breath or body, maybe sound, maybe it's recitation of phrases, open awareness, maybe rain, working with emotions, maybe something else. But just notice what feels maybe most inviting or the most maybe easeful, supportive for how you're feeling right now. So choosing an anchor or an object for your samadhi to help gather the heart and mind, but that doesn't feel so effortful. Choosing an anchor that helps center ease, spaciousness, even if to a small degree. Continuing to relax the body, the mind, the heart. Intending to meet yourself however you're showing up, regardless if practice is unfolding the way you'd like it to unfold or not. Can you meet yourself and meet this moment like you would a good friend? The moment that you notice the mind has wandered is actually awareness returning. Awareness hasn't abandoned you. is just left for a little while. And so, in that recognition of awareness returning, perhaps you can plant a seed for gratitude or appreciation, maybe joy. Potentially even adding, I love you, keep going. Or if where the mind wandered off to felt maybe a little more challenging, you could say instead, and this too, or and this too, my love, before placing your attention again on your anchor. Sometimes you might catch yourself thinking and not making that moment wrong in any way. Instead, your mind might have just needed a little bit of a rest. The mind wandering and resting has been a survival coping mechanism we've inherited from ancestors. So, nothing wrong. And even just recognizing that you were thinking, that's awareness returning. Awareness of thought. At which point you may continue being aware of your thinking. Or you might drop in again that phrase, I love you, keep going. This too, my love. Before becoming aware once again of your chosen anchor. It feels supportive and you're not yet doing it, you might relax your effort even more so that you let go of practicing with an anchor and instead you trust in the companionship of your awareness so that you're simply noticing whatever you're noticing, whether in a given moment it's a thought or a sound or a sensation, a thought again, another thought, another sound, etc. So choiceless awareness or open awareness, in which the main constant is your mindfulness, your capacity to be aware. I love you. Keep going. Or, and this too, my love. And in the last couple minutes here, you might relax your effort even more so that you are being instead of doing. So you're not trying to practice a certain way, you're not even trying to be aware. Just simply being. The good news is that awareness is part of who you are already. And so it'll come and go, but you don't have to hold on to it. Don't have to notice it. As best you can. Simply be. Nowhere to go, no one to be. Just resting here. Thank you for your practice. Hey, welcome back. So this evening I wanted to talk about taking refuge, or the taking refuge, and in particular the three jewels, the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And you most likely are familiar with these teachings, um, and I still, regardless of where you might be in practice experience with the refuges or the triple gem, I think it's something worthwhile to revisit every now and again, because especially if we do so with a beginner's mind, then it simply can deepen our relationship to the jewels, or to the concept of taking refuge. So for me, when I first heard the word refuge, and even just taking refuge, I didn't really give it much thought. And it quickly became this thing that we say in Buddhist communities that I took for granted without ever actually stopping to consider what it meant. And so one day I ended up looking up the word refuge. Even though I had an idea of what it was, I just want to kind of start from the basics. And so to take refuge, or refuge rather, is a safe place. And so we might think of it as when there's, say, a storm of some sort, like, say, a thunderstorm, we would quickly try to run for some sort of cover. And that's us taking refuge. And then in a larger sense, refuge can even include maybe the fact that we can go to hospitals when we get sick, at least some of us, you know, and that some of us may consider law enforcement or the law safe places, and that's not the case for everybody. But those places like hospitals and laws and law enforcement can also be a refuge for some. And so, of course, that's for the body mostly. But then when we consider refuge in terms of practice, what we're really considering is what can be a refuge for our heart and mind. Because certainly I was reading stories about this or hearing stories about this during the pandemic, how some people could technically be safe. They have a home, they have a roof over their head, they have a bed to sleep in, but they could still be afraid. Or we could be with a group of people who think they're safe for everybody, but we might not feel safe in that group. Or we could also feel lonely. And so then the question becomes, where can we go to shelter from the difficulties or the challenges of the heart? Where can the mind take shelter? And I like to think that yearning for refuge is often what brings people to practice in the first place. It becomes this response to this fundamental human need. And then this idea of taking refuge even simply means it, you know, finding some sort of spiritual security. That's how I understand it. And in Buddhism, we take refuge in the three refuges, is what it's sometimes called. But these teachings are considered to have such value that they're also called the triple gem or the three jewels. And that's the refuge of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And then these three jewels, they act like a safe container. A container where when we live taking refuge or with this in mind, then it can act as a protection of the heart, basically. And ultimately, and I'll go over each one a little bit more, perhaps to remind you of what you already know, or to invite you in a new, to think of each refuge in a different way. But generally, as we open to the idea of refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, we're trying to, or we're intending to open to a space that is not pulled into a bunch of brain activity, that doesn't get hooked into messages of culture that tell us things about who we are that aren't true. But instead, when we take refuge in the three jewels, we're opening up to a space of the heart and a space of the present moment. And so when we take refuge in the Buddha, it can mean different things for different people. For some, it's taking refuge in the historical Buddha, who was human. And so the fact that the Buddha was able to study his mind and heart in such a precise way and yet still be human and obtain enlightenment or attain enlightenment, and we're human too, can give us this this boost, this inspiration to practice. Yet the word Buddha also means awake. And so if, say, and I've had phases where when I first started practicing, taking refuge in the Buddha really resonated. And then at some point in my practice, I was like, I don't want another dude telling me what I should be doing in my practice. And so it was less so about taking refuge in the Buddha or even this statue outside of myself, but instead it became in my own capacity to awaken as well, because I was also human like the Buddha. One of the things that I also appreciate with the Buddhist practice is that he realized that all beings without exception have the same nature and potential for enlightenment, and that this is known as Buddha nature, and that every sentient being has Buddha nature. And then when we're able to touch into our Buddha nature, we can access boundless and limitless amounts of, say, loving kindness, compassion, joy for others, equanimity. And it's not this state that we get to where suddenly everything is taken care of. It's not this far off, distant place. Instead, I like to think of Buddha nature as this place that we are all already touching to some degree in our practice. Perhaps not for as long as we'd like, nor as often as we like, yet we are touching it to some degree already. I have a little demo, and so if you're not looking at the screen, I'll try to describe it, and you might want to open your eyes. And so I have a bottle of glitter. And so I like to think that when we come to practice, or the way we often live our life, is that we're all shaken up. And so I'm shaking up the bottle of glitter now. And so you might see the swirl of glitter in the bottle. And the thing is if we walk around long enough, with this agitated heart and mind, we might not realize that it is actually agitated. And we might actually think that the shaken upness is normal. And yet when we slow down for practice, you might begin to see how the glitter is starting to settle, and that there's a little bit more space. And so then I like to think that the glitter is our thoughts and opinions, and that when we slow down and quiet the heart and mind, we begin to see the spaces between the glitter. Eventually, and it doesn't always happen in every meditation session, but eventually over the long run, all the glitter begins to settle. And then what we can see is our Buddha nature. We can see a lot more clearly. And so that is one of the gifts of this practice. And yet, at least from my experience, when I've been on certain retreats, we sometimes describe practice as this purification practice. And I would often, I don't know if I said this the last time I came, but I would often look around the Dharma hall, and everyone looked so peaceful. And that what I felt like I was going through was being stuck on the spin cycle, if it was really like a purification practice, when everyone else looked like they were getting a warm bath. And so it is not always easy for everybody, but it doesn't mean that this practice isn't for us. Because remember, the mind will naturally settle under the correct conditions. Every sentient being without exception has Buddha nature. And so we sometimes say that there are 84,000 Dharma doors. And so what I take it to mean when we might be struggling is that in a given moment, we just might need to knock on a different door. That the particular means that we might be trying to practice with in that moment might not be the one, might not be so supportive. But I do firmly believe that it is our birthright to experience the benefits and to touch into the limitless qualities of loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, and so many others. But that this is our birthright. Which reminds me of this poem from Hafiz that I'll read. And so Hafiz, Sufi poet, says, "You are the sun in drag. You are God hiding from yourself. Remove all the mine that is the veil. Why ever worry about anything? Listen to what your friend Hafiz knows for certain. The appearance of this world is a Magi's brilliant trick, though its affairs are nothing into nothing. You are a divine elephant with amnesia, trying to live in an anthole. Sweetheart, oh sweetheart, you are God in drag." What I like about that poem is like I take sun and God, when Hafiz is saying you were the sun in drag, you were God in drag, to mean Buddha nature. And that also with the sweetheart, oh sweetheart, it's a little bit like the invitation of the blend of the samadhi and loving kindness practice of like, this too, my love. And so taking refuge in the Buddha can be taking refuge in your own capacity to awaken. And what I particularly love about that is that wakefulness itself doesn't have a gender or a race, but rather it represents our own potential, our own capacity for goodness. And taking refuge in our wakefulness is a good thing, not just for ourselves, but for the world. And it's so needed right now. And then Dhamma. So the word Dhamma or Dharma in Sanskrit can be used in many different ways. So Dhamma means nature. Yes, nature like outside, but I take it more, or rather it's more the nature of all of this, the way things really are. Not the way we think they are, but the way they really are. Dhamma is also taking refuge in the brilliant body of teachings that guide us to know truth for ourselves in a very personal way. I can't imagine navigating this life or my practice without this body of teachings. And anytime I try to imagine how others might be doing it, how they might be trying to live life without these teachings, I feel like it doesn't take me long to recognize like, oh, wait, no, I'm actually seeing that already play out in the news. And so as a result, there's a lot of gratitude for the fact that there's this precision in what we're doing and that it's actually all laid out. Taking refuge in the way that things are can also be experienced as this practice of non-contention, so non-fighting. And that's also another way that I like to paraphrase Dhamma for myself. It doesn't mean that everything's okay all of the time, but it can simply mean, or at least start with asking ourselves, am I willing to meet this moment without contention? One of the invitations I gave in the meditation was, can we meet this moment like a friend? And I think that comes from Sylvia Bornstein, Spirit Rock teacher. To meet this moment as it is. It does not mean spiritually bypassing, although it can sound like that. Can I just accept it as it is? So it's not spiritually bypassing. The way I interpret this is when we're not fighting the present moment or we're not fighting the conditions, we are able to see more clearly because there's just maybe less tension, less agitation, like that bottle of glitter being agitated. And then when we're able to see more clearly, then we can choose more wisely. And then when we can choose wisely, we can create less harm for ourselves and others now and in the future. And so it's Aaron Treat who I've heard said that Dhamma or the refuge or jewel of Dhamma is moving from a thought-based reality to a sense-based reality. So not what we think, but how things truly are. Sometimes Dhamma can be paraphrased as truth as well. And I think, makes me think of, say, what is a big lie that we might be buying into? And I think a fundamental illusion or lie that we live with is that I am separate, or that we are separate from each other. And this comes from Carl Jung. Like an island in the sea, we appear as distinct individuals, but beneath the surface, we're all connected. And so again, we're all connected and we are also all different. So it's a both and. One of my teachers, Larry Yang, says, who we are is where we start. And so just to highlight the connectedness while also honoring the difference is a quote from Larry Yang's book, Awakening Together. And so Larry writes, I've heard some Dharma teachers avoid talking about diversity in culture, saying something like, why dwell on our differences? The point of our practice is to see similarities, as if differences inevitably lead to suffering. But it is the fact that our lives are not just made up of similarities. Like any manifestation of nature, like any snowflake, leaf on a tree, or shape of a cloud, we all have attributes that are unique characteristics that are common. It is through seeing the deep nature of our differences and how they are a part of our lives that we can also see the deep similarities of our human experience. We all feel different at some point in our lives. And that experience of difference is a similarity common to us all. Just as we cannot have a life without both joys and sorrows, we cannot have a life without both differences and similarities. And so I feel like that's a great segue into the third jewel, Sangha, often paraphrased as community. In the Buddha's time, it was the community of enlightened practitioners, and then it became the practice community. And then now, 2,600 plus years later, it's the wider practice community, so lay people included as well. And so there's this power in coming together. You might not maybe have words to it, but you just know that on Monday nights you come here and it's like one of your non-negotiables, and you really make an effort to show up in this way. And so it's kind of like coming together, like we might build a safe fire, that we are many logs, and so we're bringing in a lot of logs, and that from that, in the coming together, there can be this brightness, this force of nature, and that we can draft off of each other's practices in a certain way, where then we can produce enough warmth that we can feel together. We can also take refuge in Sangha in the sense of knowing that there were millions of practitioners that have been protecting these teachings for thousands of years, so that we can access the teachings today in this way. So partly on Zoom, partly in person. Yeah, in the year 2024, in the different locations that we're in. And then when I think of that, when I personally think of, yeah, thank you to all the people, the practitioners, even the people who may not have been practicing per se, but who donated food or shelter to the practice community. I tend to think or imagine, what would people in the future, if they're doing the same reflection, then I'd be included in that too. And so that, I don't know, or all of us, and so that just lights me up and adds a little bit more fire in wanting to practice. The bad news, though, is that Sangha is considered to be the imperfect jewel of the three. So again, reminding us that sometimes the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha can be referred to as as three jewels. And so Sangha is sometimes the imperfect jewel, because, I mean, as soon as you have people talking, more than one person, and you're all talking, there's bound to be some sort of friction at some point. However, it's believed that, and I truly believe this too, that Sangha or other members of our community provide the necessary friction that we need to wake up. Although sometimes it could feel like a rude awakening. But basically it invites our awareness or stationary practice into the realm of relationship. With other practitioners, with colleagues, family members, neighbors, roommates. And it's a way for, our internal practice coming alive in the external world, while we're also taking stock of, impact and building relationships. And so this is where community gets built. And so this is from the Buddha. This is the entire spiritual life, Ananda. That is good friendship, good companionship, good comradeship. When a practitioner has a good friend, a good companion, a good comrade, it is natural that she will develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path. And then for those of us who are unaware, the Noble Eightfold Path is the path that the Buddha taught that leads to enlightenment. And what I love about the Eightfold Path is that so much of it is about being in the world and in relationship. Very little of the path is really about, say, sitting on a cushion. And so as you might show up on a Monday night, looking forward to maybe seeing familiar faces, reconnecting with people after a week apart, in a lot of ways, you're turning to Sangha, but you're also Sangha for others too. And that, you know, sometimes, at least for me, I tend to think that, you know, little old me trying to avoid an itch or trying to avoid moving or looking at my timer or whatever I might be struggling with in a given session might not feel like a lot. But it is a lot. And I want us to do a visualization. I'll guide us through it. And just to illustrate the allotness of each moment of our practice. And so this visualization comes from Akaya Winwood, who is from the Othering and Belonging Institute. And I'll give you a little bit of a disclosure. So it was part of a mentor training that I was in. And it was a mentor training in which like there was a lot of my friends on the Zoom. And so I remember just being excited to see a lot of my friends. And so I was chatting them. And so I caught only part of the visualization. Yet it was still quite powerful. And that's the part I caught is the part I'll guide us through. You don't have to close your eyes. It'll be quite short, maybe just less than 5 minutes. You can close your eyes, turn them downward, just get comfortable. You don't have to be too formal about it, since visualization invites us to use our mind to see images. It's also possible that it's hard for you to visualize, at least right now, and maybe this is something you come back to. But one way we can warm up our visualization muscle is to bring to mind the last thing you ate or drank. And so if you can imagine that, maybe where you were, what it was. And so that's visualization. You can let that image go. And then now bring to mind the year 250 years from now. So it's the year 2274. And as you think of this year 2274, just notice what comes up in terms of, wow, I never thought of the future in such a precise way. The futuristic movies I watch don't even go that high up to 2274, you know, whatever, just notice. And then also now widen your perspective and you're outdoors this year, 2274. What is the landscape like? What is the sky like? What is the vegetation like? Now you see a young being running. What is the gender of this young being? In this year of 2274, is there one gender, two genders, three, 12, an infinite amount of genders? Are they running out of fear or out of joy? What are they running to or to do? And then you can let this visualizing go and slowly come back to your body resting here. And slowly lift your gaze or blink your eyes open. And so after I was guided through that visualization in that mentor training, I'm sure the facilitator knew that I was like not really present, because when she asked everybody, so who would like to share? And then it was pretty silent. And I'm pretty sure I was like typing to somebody like hi or something like that. And because right there the facilitator like zoned in on me and was like, Dawn, you please tell us how it was. And for me, the part of the visualization that I did catch, it was difficult. And I wonder if I didn't catch more of it because I was like avoiding, because I was going between this beautiful, possible, abundant possibility in the year 2274 and flitting back and forth with this apocalyptic view. And so I said, I'm not doing it right because I keep going back and forth. And so what I appreciated with what she said, Akaya Winwood, she said, there's no right or wrong, which is what a lot of teachers say. But also that's why we practice. Because if we don't practice, no matter how mundane we might think our practice might be, if we don't practice, then we are contributing in whether it's in small or big ways to that apocalyptic view. But as long as we're practicing purifying the heart and mind, cultivating beautiful, boundless qualities of the heart, then we're contributing to that possible, that possibility in that year 2274 for that being in the vegetation and the sky, etc. And so that makes me think again of how people in the future might look back and think of us as, whether they know us by name or not, but just as protectors of the Dhamma, people who have perpetuated or continued this practice so they can access it too, to continue contributing to that future as well. And then just to close, a couple quotes. One is from Soto Zen teacher Reb Anderson. Each of you, not separately, but in the cauldron of all beings, cooking and being cooked, is realizing awakening. Not you by yourself, because that's not who you really are. You by yourself are not Buddha nature. but your being in the cauldron of all beings is realizing the Buddha way. And then from Angel Kyoto Williams, love and justice are not two. Without inner change, there can be no outer change. Without collective change, no change matters. And then finally, Rumi, we're all just walking each other home. So thank you for your attention, friends. Perhaps there was something in it for you. If not, just let it all float away. And if there was and you can't recall, I think this is being recorded, so you can revisit it somehow. Yeah, so we have some time. If there are any questions or comments, shares, complaints, all of that is welcome. This practice is beautiful and powerful. It could hold it all. And I think Adam is probably running the mic in the Dharma hall, and then on Zoom, if you could raise your Zoom hand, which is at the bottom of the screen. If you don't know how to do that and you're on camera, you can raise your actual hand and we'll be able to see you.
All right, so does anybody in the hall have a question or comment or insight to share?
We have someone online, Adam.
Yeah, I think it's Nicholas.
Yeah.
Good evening, Don. Good
Hi.
evening, everyone. I have a question, Don, related to that makes me curious to hear more about your insights and where you're standing. When you were talking about the goodness, our potential for goodness, you mentioned several times also in the beginning that this is so needed in our time. And I was just thinking of it yesterday too in the meditation hall at the session that all the things that all those traditions, like you brought Hafiz tonight, supported was not just how to say a blind or a one mind pursuit of shunyata, like, oh, I want to. I think they even might have called it in Zen sickness in some way. So I was thinking of all the contributions, cultural and civilizing contributions that all those enlightened beings and their networks basically produced for, just like you said, for the future of humanity. They put out their literature, architecture, sculpture, music, incredible amounts of beauty, goodness, and thoughtfulness. Was not just shunyata alone, or just like the Sufi would say, be with the beloved and just stay there. So how, my question to you is, I just need, to hear more inspiring thoughts about that. How do you feel this need for goodness? Like, what is happening in our times? Because what I see from my experience living in the West for the last 25 years and also living in another, how to say, materialistic society, is that I see that programming that makes us content with lack of culture, intelligent thought, and beauty in our life. Just experience. Even if we do this Buddhist approach for sense experience, it seems to me that there is another need, a deeper need for cultivating beauty and bring other things, out of this practice. So thank you so much. I'm sorry for the long thought. I'm interested to hear your insights.
Yeah, thanks, Nicholas. I think what comes to mind is that I think what we're seeing a lot of in the world, and not just in the news, but just like, if I think of some holidays, like Black Friday, and just like the shenanigans that lead to harm around that holiday. And there's many holidays and many things around the world. What comes to mind is that it's still about refuge, but false refuge. And so the Buddha taught that taking refuge in the three jewels can lead to a sure heart's release because they are reliable. But I think what is happening is that in the world, we You know, and there could be many reasons. Who knows why? You know, there's an infinite number of conditions that have led things to be that people aren't able to see what is a reliable or true refuge and a false refuge. And so what's happening, I think, is that there's a lot of false refuge. But underlying, it's like, I think it's quite clear that people are suffering and they're looking for some relief of the suffering. It's just that it's in consumerism, or it's in numbing ourselves out, or whatever it is, and then or like exerting power over, and so that can lead to harm, etc. And so yeah, so I think that there's certainly that epidemic in many societies, taking false refuge. And I do appreciate how you brought in just like different modalities. So not just different traditions, but music and art, nature. Because I think there can be, although it's challenging, but through the many different avenues, there can be ways to access people's hearts. You know, if they're more inclined to music, then maybe they can come across a beautiful piece of music that will just make them stop, bring them to tears, and then that changes the trajectory of their life. Or visiting a certain place, and then, you know, and then they happen to be without their cell phones or something like that, and they could really be with nature in that moment or something. Yeah, that's at least the hope, you know, that's the hope that I have. But yeah, thank you, Nicholas. I'm not sure. I hope that that resonated or that answered your question somewhat.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. No. And like they say, there is a motto in our library at the center, may all beings read.
May
You
I
know,
love
all beings read.
that. Yes, I love that, right? Yeah. I often think about, so I was, my very first trip, solo trip, was backpacking through Southeast Asia when I was going through a quarter life crisis. And so there was no real cell phones. At that time, it was internet cafes, and I had to buy phone cards to call home, etc. And so I remember just having so much time to reflect and to read, and then and to meet people. And then that's how I found out about a certain monastery, and that's where I did my first practice. And I thought, if I were traveling now with cell phones, I would probably not have had that same experience. I think I would have been entertained enough, so the false refuge, to not ever be curious to visit a monastery, or to never suffer enough to want some relief in a true way by going to a monastery. Because I went originally because I was so homesick. I was alone, I was so far from home. Um and then I remember I met somebody who was like, you should do Vipassana. I was like, what's that? And then they gave me the phone number of their teacher, and that's how it began. So yeah, may all beings read. Thank you.
Are there any questions here in the hall for Dawn, or comments or insights? Or online?
Or complaints.
Yeah, we take those.
Send those to Adam.
Yeah. Hmm. No one, really? Oh, Jen's got it.
Don, I would love to hear you talk more about this lovely idea that I think came through Thich Nhat Hanh, that the next Buddha could well be Sangha. And it seems like there's sort of a natural downhill, graceful slide from what you've been talking about tonight into that idea. And I'd love to hear you share your thoughts.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that. I think, what comes to mind, I just, Adam and my teacher Tanisra, she often calls just like the challenges the collective challenges that we're facing, climate level and just like wars and whatnot, as our curriculum. And so the curriculum that we're kind of like what we're practicing for. And I've only lived in this era, so I can't compare to other eras, but I do feel as if what is at our doorstep is immense and challenging is, of course, doesn't even capture it. And so as a result, to even imagine that we can hold what's happening on our own is just unbearable, I think. And so I think it's in coming together and in sharing our sorrows as a Sangha so we can co-hold it, but also to share in the joy so that we can resource each other and then get the energy to continue trying to care for the planet or protest or advocate or whatever it might be that's important to us. I think that kind of strength can only come, at least the kind of strength that I feel is needed can only come from being in community. Doing it alone is not so I think possible anymore. And what comes to mind, I was on a retreat, it was a teacher's retreat, and we were at the Land of the Medicine Buddha, where I think Adam recently taught, and it's somewhere in California is all I know. But a bunch of us teachers, we were maybe 15 or 20 of us, and we walked through the forest and we decided we were going to do a silent walk. And then we came across this beautiful altar where people were placing objects of devotion, etc. And then one of the teachers was Kyra Jolingo, who was a Thich Nhat Hanh monastic for about 15 years. And so then she spontaneously led us through a ceremony that was just kind of recognizing the harm that we caused to the earth. And it was like really precise and not necessarily graphic, but it was so detailed that it was so undeniable to feel the pain of the earth. And at the same time, to feel the confusion of the people who have caused all this harm, including me and ourselves. And I wept, and a lot of us, we wept and wept and wept for the harm that the earth is receiving. And at the same time, it felt cathartic and like I don't think that would have come out if I was alone. And I don't think I would have, if it did come out when I was alone, I don't know if that depth of sorrow, if I would have felt like I could come out of it if I was alone. And then when I was on the other side, just the spaciousness and the inspiration to choose differently from then on, but then to be held in any mistakes or confusion by community, that was really powerful. And so in that moment, it was around the earth, but, insert any other collective, challenge that we might be holding. And I think that could apply as well. And then I also just think, like, how much time do we have? Just like how sometimes a lot of communities, or it's more like, again, a little bit of the Sangha basically helps us see where we're stuck. Whenever I try to see any moment of friction I have with somebody as like a warning light, as if it's on the car, telling me you're attached to a view right now. And what is that view you're attached to? And so that way, even though it might be painful, even though I might be like, they don't know what they're talking about, and I might be defensive or whatever, that there is something there for me to see, and that could that be something to let go of that can get me a little closer to the Sure Hearts release. That wouldn't be possible if I was just practicing in a corner alone, or practicing with people who will only tell me things that I want to hear. you know. So yeah, so I don't think that we can continue to deepen our waking up without others in our life, whether they're practitioners or not. And maybe the last thing I'll say on that end, because I know a lot of us, practice is really important to us, and we might live in a place or be a part of other communities where practice is not important to them. And even though I think it's so nourishing to have friends who are also practitioners, I like to think that it's not obligatory. I have plenty of friends. I'm married to somebody who doesn't practice, but I'd like to look toward friendships or deepening relationships in people that embody the qualities that I love about this practice, regardless of how they cultivated them. And it provides me a way to not hide behind the language. I can't just like giggle and say, oh, that's anatta, non-self, or whatever, or like, oh, karuna, compassion. I actually have to embody compassion, have to embody loving kindness, and so that's another way that Sangha lifts us up, not just pointing out where we're attached, but just like, yeah, providing this light for us to continue to step into what, our Buddha nature more frequently, basically. So yeah, those are a few words, a lot of words. I hope that helps. Thank you, everyone, once again for your practice and just showing up in the ways that you show up. May we remember that we are not alone. May we remember that we are all on this path of awakening together. And when we pause and listen into the quiet presence of our innate heart, we are listening together. May our intentions be sincere. May our loving kindness be boundless. May our wisdom be deep. And may our practice and presence benefit all beings without exception, oppressing none, exploiting none. May the merits of our practice promote the causes of true happiness, well-being, safety, and sustainability for all. Thank you, friends.